Hi, this is Dave Davies of the Kinks.
Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to the final episode of Season 6 of Music is Not a Genre. I'm going to teach you these hand gestures. Now, I do them real quickly, but, this is going to spread like wildfire because everybody loves the show, right? It's like YMCA. I don't know. So, MxG. Music is not a genre. That's what those hand gestures mean. Thank you out there for watching and listening. As always, if you are just listening, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotgenre. You get a video for every episode of this podcast. If you are watching, go to nickdimatteo.com/musicisnotgenre, and you can stream the audio from wherever you stream podcasts. And also, as always, patreon.com/musicisnotgenre if you would like to support this. And thank you for the supporters who are already on Patreon, including some guests. Let me tell you the title and the topic of this final podcast of Season 6. It is the Freewheeling Catch-Up Machine number 8. I live for this. Get it? Live, live. And yeah, and I, both are kind of true. This is the first live podcast recording that I have done since I think Season 2. Might have been Season 1. I don't even remember at this point. I think Season 2. So I'm pretty excited about this. And I would like to thank everyone who is joining in with me to chat, particularly Julie, Nikki, Allegra. As of now, I know I have a few more people coming, and I appreciate all of you. This is going to be interesting because I haven't done one of these live ones just quite like this before. The last live one was a whole different concept. So as you may know from previous episodes of the Freewheeling Catch-Up Machine, I go over fan comments from other episodes and other things on my YouTube channel or anywhere else and run that down. And I'll be doing that, of course, as usual. But at the same time, my hope is that sparks some comments from the people who are joining in with me right now, because, as I say at the end of every episode, my objectives are music, conversation, and connection. I get a whole lot of the first one and the last one. Not as much of the second one, except for the, interviews and back talk series and things I do. So this is a perfect opportunity to really beef up the conversation. Let's get right into it. So kicking this off, Catch Up 7, Burning Two Bridges is one of my most repeat. He's a repeat listener on YouTube, or watcher, I guess you could say. Is a very big fan, tends to check out every single episode. And so if you are there, Burning Two Bridges, thank you. And the comment from Catch Up 7 was about the song that I had featured at the end of it, which is from my rec here. I'm pointing at the shirt. Upcoming album, Kite to Camden. The song was Twist My Kite. It was the single that I had released at the time of Catch Up 7. And Burning Two Bridges says, quote, "I'm overthinking," unquote. What a great lyric. So thank you. Appreciate anybody who appreciates my lyrics. For my actor reel, which I posted, I think, last year, Doug Hansen said, "Awesome." Hello, Doug. Thank you. The interview I did with John Kieran Fernandez, somebody named Schleggy said he's the coolest. Dexter 649, John is such a cool guy. Ran into him at Low Yo Yo Stuff, the Rook and Pawn at CNA. I love him as much as Jeremy and Todd from Low Yo Yo Stuff Records and Devlin Thomason from Bizarro Wuxtree. Now, what does all that mean? So John Kieran Fernandez is a guy I interviewed from a music collective called Elephant Six, and he lives down in Athens, Georgia. He has his own record label, but also works at a record store. So I'm pretty sure that's what all those things are referring to. Let's see how everybody's doing. Good. Let me take these notes to a place where I can actually see chats if anybody wants to chat. So next is about something that I was talking about in an episode called The Democratization of Music. And that person, Arcade Piano, said, well, actually, I don't know. This is was kind of interesting. It was a long rant from someone from another country about how we million musicians, and I'm just pausing to admit, Steve, who, if you know this podcast, Steve Erickson is a frequent guest. He was an interview guest and also has done 4 back talks now. In fact, we recorded one just yesterday, which will air prior to this, obviously, as this is the last one. I'm going to, as I said to everyone else, I'm keeping everyone muted and off camera. So just for this one, it might make it a little bit easier. If you have any comments, please put them in the chat box because I'm excited. I want to get into it with you. Anyway, so back to this democratization of music. Why trends no longer matter. There was a long rant from somebody from another country about how we million musicians have the power to create whatever we want and how it's better than past music, how busking is illegal in his country and busking is playing, in public for money, for tips, how money shouldn't be exchanged for music ever, even for indie people. Some stuff about Brad Pitt and cocaine and sleeping your way to the top. So it's pretty interesting and a little bit unhinged rant. Some interesting points, though, about how music is made, distributed, consumed. I have to disagree about, not paying for music and musicians not getting paid. But of course, you would expect me to say that. Duran Duran episode is my most popular episode so far. And it's gotten over 5,000 views on YouTube, and a lot of people have commented, continue to comment. Someone named Sushi Lean said, Los mejores Duran Duran. Nice. MCSE Man 23. The fun fact about Future Past is one of their albums is that on a few of the tracks, Simon had his middle daughter, Saffron, as a backing vocalist. I have had my children on my recordings as backing vocalists, as well as my wife and my dad. Always fun. We just saw Foo Fighters live last week, and Dave Grohl had his daughter come out and sing with him, which he does at almost every show, I believe. Fenris U66 said, I'm sorry to correct you. Maybe Power Station was bigger in the US than Arcadia, but worldwide, Arcadia sold better than Power Station, even in the US. So Power Station was an offshoot of Duran Duran, as was Arcadia. And apparently, Arcadia sold better throughout. Somebody asked me if I was born around 1971 and did not follow up as to why they asked me that. John DeSalvo said technically they were a British new wave synth pop rock band. Roxy Music and David Bowie were big influences. Duran they're one of the greatest bands ever. Love these boys. So this is what you get when you put stuff up on YouTube. If you're lucky, you get comments like this because it gives you a chance to connect with people, as we're doing here. And as I'm thinking through this, because this is the first time I'm doing an episode like this, I am going to do the rundown of all of these comments. And there are topics. If you know anything about Music Is Not a Genre, you know that I do not stick to one kind of music or one topic or one era. I can bounce from the history of hip hop production to Elvis Presley to King's X to Duran Duran to Charlie XCX. Is a recent episode that, as of this, I think would have aired maybe 2 or 3 weeks before. So and what that hope there is that there are connections between all of those things, and that it brings a community of music lovers together that don't confine themselves to one kind of music. And that if I say, oh, a music is related to something you don't know, that it might spark you to explore more of that, and or just to have a conversation about it. And that's what a lot of this is doing. I did an episode on two-hit wonders, making the claim that there are way more two-hit wonders than you would think, and that a lot of the artists we think of as one-hit wonders actually had 2 or more hits. Amelia, someone I interviewed on this show, said, "What a list! I got a kick out of you singing the songs. I never knew Mark Dinning had released other songs. Of all the songs you mentioned, I've got Jimmy Loves Marianne and Billy Don't Be a Hero stuck in my head." And that's one of those songs from my childhood that I couldn't believe someone else remembered. Damn you, K-Tel. Some bands from the 90s only having one hit, Jellyfish, Takedo, The Subdudes, and School of Fish. But I don't know if any of them had top 40 or even mainstream charting songs. And the interesting thing about that episode was that I said that the idea that a hit is only a hit if it's top 40 is a false construct, in the sense that if you are an artist out of the millions of artists in the world, and for some reason your song makes it to 41 or 81 or even hell 101, you mean to tell me you're not going to feel like that? A, that was a hit, and B, you're making money from that, and C, there are millions of people who have now heard that song. It may not be a song that people remember, or like Modern English, Melt With You, a song that was not a top 40 hit. People remember that song and it's played billions of times every year. So it's an interesting idea. At any rate, and I know I'm going through all of this fast, but stop me. And if you hit a comment about something I said previously, I am willing to jump around. Believe me. I did an episode on the history of music videos, and there's a guy on LinkedIn who's a fan of mine. His name is, well, his screen name is Slothgard the Crazy Viking. He talked about how 1894 was the first time a video was set to recorded music, and it was called Little Lost Child. And that the Big Bopper in 1958 is said to have coined the term music video. He for some reason he switched up the dates on a couple of things there, but I knew what he was talking about, and it was cool that he knew that actually without even seeing the episode. So interesting. Uh, so here's something I would love to hear feedback on. A, has anybody been watching on YouTube my mini series, which I'm calling the Wreck Origin Story? I've done short videos, about 7 of them now, on where wreck comes from. I'm not going to comment on the nature of the videos, except to say that if you're watching them, you're going to have a lot of questions, especially as I get into story part 8, part 9, part 10. And I hope that piques your interest, but go to the YouTube, at Music Is Not a Genre, and check out the Origin Story playlist. You'll get a kick out of it. Doug Hansen, who also watched my actor reel, said, "Thank you for sharing your experience and your honesty, plus your work. Musicians have so many ups and downs. I don't know you, but from what I've heard, you've got so much heart." And Origin Story 6, Mary Lou, who is someone, a friend of my mom's, actually. "I hope you find the direction in which your life needs to go." So I don't want to spoil this origin story, except to say that I haven't really connected it to Music Is Not a Genre. So it's kind of the first time, or maybe second time, that I'm mentioning it at all on this podcast. And it is a, I don't know, it's leading up to something. It's leading up to the new album. It's leading up to a show that I plan to put together, a stage show in the next year or two. The band that I'm putting together now, we're doing some shows at the end of the year, and that's just the beginning of kind of getting that together. So check that out. Good friend of mine from band Ape Cafe we were in the 90s, Pete Bradis, had interviewed him, and 2 of his former students watched the interview and said, "We love you, Mr. B. You're so awesome." I did an episode on weird names, weird band names, and one I missed so many because you can't find them all. You never can. And I always say to people, go to Patreon, support me, which you wonderful people already are, because the amount of income you get from this allots you to be able to set aside the time to do what I'm doing. And I already spent hours and hours on each episode, but the more support I get, the more research I'm able to do, the more bells and whistles I'm able to put in videos and things like that. Butt Trumpet, it's the name of a band that I missed. Punk band founded in 1991. Steve, any of you actually, you may know some weird band names. If any of them pop into your head, put them in the chat box, because I know for a fact I probably only named about 3% of the weirdest band names out there in that episode. And that was an episode inspired by my mom. Actually, they were watching Jeopardy, and it was something about a weird band name. Amelia Ray said Herman's Hermits. She thought that was a weird band name, and out of context, I believe. John Melanowski said, really enjoyed listening to this episode. One of my favorite weird names for a band is I Can Lick Any Son of a Bitch in the House. And that's all one word. Although not particularly well known outside the Pacific Northwest, they do have several albums out. Burning Two Bridges, big fan, said, personally, I like Mary's Danish because it can be read in two ways. Which true? Is it her Danish that she's eating, or is she Danish? It's weird in a different way. I did an episode on King's X because a fan said do an episode on King's X. So I did. And they were or are this progressive metal funk power pop band. There's so many things you can put that they range, and it was fun exploring them. Sean Hoke, who was the person who suggested it, uh, said to do. Doug has a project. Doug Pinnick, who's the lead singer and bass player, I believe, of King's X. He has a project with Ray Luzier of Korn and George Lynch called KXM. That's very worth checking out. Enjoyed the podcast. Glad you went on a journey worth taking, and glad you suggested it, Sean. I really appreciate that. Terrence Caneo said, enjoyed this a lot. I was impressed by the amount of homework done and the careful treatment of the catalog. Naturally, I was surprised by some of the views expressed, which I always hope to surprise people with some of my views. I also think Ear Candy, a King's X album, is fantastic, but I was stunned that Manic Moonlight received such a positive review. That's, I think, the controversy is a lot of hardcore King's X fans don't like Manic Moonlight because it doesn't sound like their other stuff, which is what I love about artists, that they're able to do things like that. I was also surprised that Ty's solo work received a lukewarm. Ty Tabor, the guitarist. Yeah, I appreciate his musicianship. Didn't love everything he did. But I appreciate your comment. Said Seymour said, fantastic deep dive into the catalog of my favorite band. What you'll find if you keep listening to King's X is that other songs that didn't jump out at you at first will get into your head. I mean, that's true of any band. I say that about Wreck. And fortunately, I have some great fans and listeners out there. But that I like to make songs that get you on the first listen in some way. But that if you listen more and more, you didn't get it all. And the more you listen, the more it sinks into you. And of course, a band like King's X is like that, or any good band. Welcome to the Groove Machine is a side project of King's X, and Just Herb B66, Just Herb 666, I believe. Demonic. I've seen them live around 75 times, and they never disappoint. I haven't seen anything live 75 times except for a show I did myself, which had I did 75 performances of that. It was like an interactive Irish show, which some of the people on here might remember me doing back in Philly. Albums of the 90s. That was part of my album series, which I just did albums 2000s, and I'm going to do albums of the 2010s, and that'll be the end of that series. I'll do a little bit about the 2020s and beyond, and that's it. Margiski 7711 said, music is not very diverse now. Most genres are basically underground. The mainstream is pretty narrow now. In 90s, there were way more genres in mainstream and blah, 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 blah. Overhyped pop and some nostalgia stuff is selling okay. I had a talk with Steve Erickson. I believe it was off. It was the bonus M extra video for the episode on Charlie XCX. And we talked a little bit about how you get a lot of podcasts where old white dudes are talking about how music today sucks. Now, I've heard people in their 20s, 30s, 40s say the same thing. I heard people say that when I was a kid. It's a common thing where you just sort of, you just stop listening to new music, and that's fine. It's not to stop listening. I mean, I prefer that people have curious enough to, put one ear out to any, something new, even if it's one song. But even if you don't, that's fine. What I think is always a misconception is that the music that you love is somehow better than the music today. And since that's something that was probably said 100 years ago, or let's say 80 years ago, people in the 40s were saying, man, music in the 20s was way better. Probably not using those words. it means that it all cancels itself out in that there's probably an equal amount of good and bad music, and no matter what's on the pop charts, there's kind of the same mix of music out there, other than something new that might have popped up, which it does from time to time. I did an MxG minute on should we scrap our system of government or change it. So I don't just talk about music. If you know, and in my music episodes, I will sometimes bring in politics and social issues, but I also do some smaller episodes on just that, and we'll connect it in some way to music or a musician's life, but do tend to stay to those topics. He shot on TikTok said the corruption runs so deep it can't be fixed without a total overhaul by prosecution and trials, and build a new modern system that will last 50 years, reevaluation at intervals. And if you someone else said if you save it 95% will have to go, better to just start over. That's a big percentage. There are many rotten apples. And here's my thought on this, and this is pretty timely when you consider the current election, and that is that there's a difference between ideals and philosophy and practicality, and you need to have the top end of that to have something to shoot for and to not become cynical and to not believe that the world is worse than it was or getting worse or whatever, because again, a lot of statistics and reports will tell you that the world is actually markedly better than it's been in history, and yet it's still not great, and there are amazingly horrible things out there. That you shoot for those things, but you need to find a way to move forward one way or another. And that was the question I had, was should we scrap the system or change it? And it was interesting to me that more people said scrap it. Uh, and I would fall more on the side of change it. Top 10 face off. So I did a face off of the top 10 albums from Rolling Stone, the top 10 albums from Apple. Steve Erickson said Amy Winehouse would be pissed off that she's come to overshadow the music that inspired her were she still alive. If she belongs in the top 10, so do the Ronettes and the Shangri-Las. Some of you out there will remember them, but a lot of these list flaws are inherent to hierarchical rankings. I don't even think the Apple list set out to say Pet Sounds is better than the Beatles, which I believe that was actually I want to say that was the Rolling Stone list that did that. The format just dictates that one has to be number two and the other below it. I'd much rather see an unranked list. I'm with you on there. I always say my top 5 favorite artists contains about 15 artists, and I stand by that. Also, I think Nirvana had to have come to transcend 90s and rock music while other grunge bands haven't. That's why they were on those lists. If you walk into a sneaker store, you're likely to see a Nirvana t-shirt. You're not going to see Pearl Jam, et cetera, et cetera. Kurt Cobain is remembered more like James Dean than a musician. True in many ways, cultural icon. And I said this on the episode, and it bears repeating, especially because I am a fan of the Beach Boys, and there are fans of the Beach Boys out there listening now. And that is that they did amazing work. There was some absolute genius work. Don't tell me that they belong above the Beatles. In your heart, fine. If that's your preference. But culturally, artistically, I'm sorry, it just doesn't cut it for me. And I hope that sparks some comments from anybody, whether it's agreement or disagreement. Hip hop production. I did an entire episode on the history of hip hop production because I'm fascinated by it. I've done some hip hop songs. I have been a fan since it has been a commercial music, since it's a recorded music. I've been a fan. Dr. Teo Mas said any music is part of a genre. So music, if it is classical, it's a genre. If it's dubstep, it's a genre, etc. It's always something, so it's always a genre. Which I guess hip hop. I think he was referring more to the title of the podcast than this. And I said this is the exact kind of discussion I love having. Yes, all music is some kind of genre. It's more likely that all music falls into more than one genre, and that's the whole point of when I say music is not a genre. It's 2 points. One is every time you try to classify something, you're going to find connections to other genres within that song or artist. And 2 is music itself is not its own entity that lives apart from the world. It is not a world genre, let's say. It is something that is connected to so many things, which is why I connect music to things outside of the music sphere. We are about 5 minutes away from the end of this half, by the way. And what I think I'm going to do for those of you here and out there is I'm going to run through. What's great is I'm running through these quickly enough that I'm going to finish long before the end of this episode, which means, fair warning, when all of you, when I close out this half and we re-click the link and start again, at a certain point, after I'm done the rest of the comments, I'm going to unmute everybody. And anybody who wants to chime in and have a conversation, jump right in. The amount of people here is a perfect for doing that. Anyway, talking about genre, and I said it's even more common that a song is part of 3, 4, 5, or more genres. The more music you listen to, the more you realize that all of it's connected. The lines between genres are constantly blurred. Music creators usually reject genre distinctions and have been for a while, vocally, and have been forever, for decades, because they restrict what an artist can do in the eyes of more rigid fans, and especially the music industry. And now we know the music industry is rigid. In part, it has to be because that's how you market things, and I get that. But in part, it doesn't have to be, and it cuts off its own feet, whatever the hell the saying is, and restricts genres to only certain audiences when there are other fans out there that they're missing. At the same time, there are fans themselves who are so rigid in their thinking that, again, like with the example of King's X, or you can name, there were Beatles albums that the fans were like, oh, they're not the Hard Day's Night Beatles anymore, I'm going to stop listening to them. That they can only take one type of music and one sound from an artist. And when an artist tries to branch out and change, you will often lose fans. But then you gain other fans who understand you better. I think of somebody like David Bowie, who went everywhere, and probably lost a bunch of fans along the way, and then gained so many more that he's now just an icon. This guy said, I can only agree. I wish I never heard music before. And then I got an MPC, and the MPC was a common to hip hop production. It's an electronic device that allows for sampling and things like that. The music would the music become part of an existing genre or a new one? And what I like about that is he's asking, when you're creating new music, are you creating a new genre because you're doing something in your own way that no one else has done, or will you be lumped in with another genre? And I think it just depends. Bintu, who may show up at this later on as a good singer-songwriter friend of mine, said, other than one of the obvious choices, Jay Dilla, one of the great hip-hop producers, one of my slightly deep cut favorites is Jay Swift. He produced the first album for The Far Side. It had a sadder descent than Dilla. Both of them died young for different reasons. One was an illness. An absolute genius musically. Jay Swift played piano. He was a musical prodigy, classically trained. He was related to a jazz musician, and all that music skill comes through in his hip hop production. There were a lot of sampling as well, but creative sampling. And then he threw piano and keys on top of that. And then he mentioned Mad Lib, which is another famous one. All right. I think right now is the perfect time to cut this in half, because the next topic is Elvis. And there were a ton of comments on Elvis. So I would like to start the second half of this episode with my comments on Elvis and a discussion. And then, like I said, I'm going to run through a few more things, and then I'm opening it up to everyone here because I'm kind of excited about that. So all of you out there for whom this is not live, hang out for the mid-roll. It's usually a minute, 2 minutes, whatever it is, and we will be right back. Hey, so I was going to do the usual and just list all of the links that I'd love for you to check out, but I realized that everything you need to know and everywhere you need to go is at nickdimatteo.com. That really is the hub. I list all the links in every episode just in case, but nickdimatteo.com is where I put everything that I do. If you want to know more about this podcast, whether it's the audio version or the YouTube version at youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre, or wherever else the podcast shows up, or if you want to support the podcast at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, just go to nickdimatteo.com. It's all there. If you want to check out my full discography of original music and covers, for my band REC, R-E-C, and beyond. It's at nickdimatteo.com, including all the streaming and social links for wherever you listen to music and wherever you check out your soch. My acting clips are there. My voiceover clips are there. Graphic design, my blog, and most especially, it's the best place to contact me. If you go to nickdimatteo.com/contact or just hit the contact is on every single page. You can send me a note, say hello, ask me any questions you'd like. You get a newsletter a few times a month. And if you have a project of your own and need work done for it, whether it's audio editing or music or voiceover or graphic design, or if you have an event and you need live music, go to nickdimatteo.com, contact me, say hello, let me know what you need. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show. All right, and we are back with Catch-Up episode, Freewheeling Catch-Up Machine number 8. All about the fans. I live for this. Puns are wonderful. And we're back with some of my comments. And as I mentioned before we hit the midpoint, I'm going to open it up to the floor, as they say. And anyone who wants to comment on anything, or if we just have a discussion, that's wonderful too. The next episode, Elvis, was one of my more popular episodes. It was a Death is Dumb, which is a topic unto itself. That's why I titled that series that. And I've done 17, I believe, episodes of Death is Dumb now. And Elvis was the latest. Mark Rogers, VOCFB, said a ton. Elvis, greatest of all time. No one comes close. There are periods after every word. He's his own genre and category. Nobody can be ranked with him or directly below him or even belongs in the same sentence. I've seen every Elvis movie 10 to 50 times. King Creole is a great movie. Great job on the podcast. You worked hard on this compilation and you know music. I appreciate that you were fair and also honest. I'm an enormous Elvis Presley fan, but I am tired of hearing the fanboys who drool on endlessly that everything he did is great when that's not the case. You somehow missed the Aloha from Hawaii live album 1973, which was Elvis' last #1 album and one of the landmark events of his career. It was the first ever satellite show viewed by 1 billion people. Give it a look. His other live performances are mind-blowing. 1956, 57, 61, 68 to 70, 72, 73, not so much 74 and 77. Greatest live performer ever. He said about me, you are authentic. That is obvious. You are not afraid to give your perspective. I appreciate that. And welcome back, Steve, by the way. And I appreciate him saying that he believes that, because I never quite know what impression I make. I try to be as much myself as possible, but also keep the train moving, so to speak, and put both information and commentary in. And it seems like that's what he's getting from it. So that's wonderful. He said, Girls, Girls, Girls is a movie, a soundtrack. I thought it was, yeah, I messed that up in that. Marie B said he was only 42 when he died. I think I might have said 47, and I don't know why that was in my head. B Buck 5 KZ 4 Ox 7, whatever, said lots of heart faces about Elvis. So loves Elvis. Gazonk 100 said ha ha, which I believe was a reference to the subtitle of this Elvis episode, which was All He's Crackered Up to Be, which was, of course, a reference to him being white and blah, blah, blah. And also just a way to, get attention for the episode. By the way, that graphic I replaced is a drawing of his face as a young Elvis, and I replaced his skin with a saltine. But for some reason, I guess the coloring, it makes him look like zombie Elvis, which I think both work. Rocking Man. There are two things one can understand about an artist. One, their place in the music world, and two, the personal liking for an artist. Much has been said about Elvis, and we know his place. Personally, I was bitten by his bug as a child. His music, his films, his character, the whole thing, funny, but the first true rock star hasn't really been surpassed. Nice opinion. There are other great artists, which I love, but Elvis had an attraction that was almost beyond human, and we're always talking about him. I mean, that part is very true. Leslie Rock 5005. I get it. When he arrived on the scene, it was unbelievable. I like that genre, his early stuff, whereas the artistry in singing other people's songs for your entire career. In the 70s, he was still stuck in the 50s. The TV comeback special in 68 is a good cure for insomnia. He didn't have the balls to create something he could call his own. Greatest poser of all time, the king of the posers. And I believe that's why she put and my response was basically That's an opinion, and you can like his early stuff, late stuff, mid stuff. I find that there's a difference between in artistically people who are vocalists and people who are artists who are creating their own music, because they're both creative pursuits and they're both very hard to do. And if you're a vocal interpreter, whoever you are, we just watched this, Celine Dion documentary. It takes a lot to take somebody else's song and make it your own and do it well and make people love it. I've done that. That's not my thing. That was 1,000% Elvis's thing, and in that realm, he's one of the best in the sense that I knew him and knew his voice, but I just didn't realize how dedicated he was to expanding his vocal range and his vocal styling and all of this. And I knew he was voracious and curious about music, in that he weaved in funk and country and soul and gospel, of course, and all of that, but really didn't still know the depth and breadth of all of that. So I get that Leslie is like, that's not a real artist. I disagree. I tend to prefer the kind of stuff I do, creating your own music and making personal statements. But you can make a personal statement with somebody else's song. So I think it's an age old debate, and I just think it's two sides of the same coin, essentially, in terms of what type of musician you are. And so I kind of said that, and she responded, "Yeah, well said, good sir. Good points." And Aerosmith, I said that Aerosmith was like that. They've become both, where they started out creating their own music and then ended up doing Diane Warren songs. And while I prefer their earlier stuff, my wife prefers their later stuff, and you can't argue either one of those. That's just the way fandom and musical taste goes, in the ear of the beholder. It's all good, said, even though different music may be, but Michael Jackson is completely up there with Elvis. This comes from someone who loved Elvis. Agreed. Judy Zeller said, I agree. The voice, the passion, the looks, the performance, no one comes close. Absolutely the greatest of all time. His life, I find extremely sad, which is kind of what I said, that listening to his music, honestly, as he, went through the 70s, depressed me more than reading about his life, because it's sort of, you could feel his life in the music. Meme M14ZU said, it's all a matter of taste. Some people like him, some don't. Girl Happy is Alex BTV's favorite soundtrack. Elvis, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody said, look up Pastor Bob Joyce. J Cat said it. And I looked him up. And apparently that is someone who people believe is the Elvis who never died. So look up Bob Joyce. And is that Elvis? Or is it Jim Morrison? I don't know. GLP, great stuff. Thanks. The bullshit about him not writing songs is laughable. He used songs written for him or otherwise as a vehicle for his unique style. Ella Fitzgerald and Sinatra didn't write songs, and they were brilliant artists. Elvis was respected by many artists, black and white. I think the thing with Elvis is when he had serious music, he was just incredible. And I mean, I agree. A lot of the thing that suffered when the soundtrack, other than him suffering, was that a lot of the music was second and third rate. It wasn't him. It was the songs. I really like the Elvis's Back LP. Make Me Know It, Best Friend, Dirty Feeling, Soldier Boy, Such a Night, Feels So Right, Like a Baby. I'm glad you mentioned his guitar playing and his musicianship. Elvis, for some reason, said he couldn't play but 3 chords, but I think he did more than that. Also played bass guitar and piano. And because I mentioned, I thought he was a great rhythm guitarist, which when they talk about the Beatles, they'll say John Lennon was one of the greatest rhythm guitarists of all time. He did solos, but he wasn't, that wasn't his thing. I know, as more primarily a rhythm guitarist than a soloist, I've done both and other things, but I prefer rhythm, that it is an art unto itself. So the fact that Elvis was that good is something to say. My interview with Amelia Ray, Steve Erickson said, I remember listening faithfully to Casey Kasem's Countdown around 84, 85, and the only songs from it that my favorite top 40 station wouldn't play were country in the 80s. They very rarely played hip hop as well, not seeing it as popular enough till Walk This Way, the collaboration between Run DMC and Aerosmith, and Fight for Your Right to Party, the big Beastie Boys breakthrough. Amelia Ray said, "Thanks, Steve. After the interview, I thought it funny that neither of us brought up Casey Kasem, even though he was clearly pivotal in our understanding of popular music. And yes, I agree that it's worth noting that, quote unquote, and this was a quote from what I quote put down here in answer to Steve, both country and hip hop hit their pop music stride and then subsequently blew up around the same time. They both started hitting their stride in the late 80s and they both blew up commercially in the 90s. And it's interesting that you have what some people consider two sides of music coming up at the same time like that. And as we know in the last few years, especially, but really even the last 20, 25 years, hip hop and country have crossed over much, much more than we realize, as has happened with a lot of types of music. Those were the comments from fans. Almost all of them. I skipped a couple that were just like, great, job or whatever. And this is season 6. You may notice that season 5 had like 40 some episodes. There were a handful of pod fasts in there, and the pod fast is my shorter vertical episode that I do every now and then and have fun with that, and slapstick, a little bit of slapstick comedy and blah 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 blah. The reason why there are a bit fewer episodes this season is because we did more podcasts, and that's because Catherine, my wife, who is basically a co-producer on this at this point, who is the reason why the videos in season 6 are so much better and prompted me to make the audio in season 6 so much better. When we batch cook episodes, we often do 2 main episodes in a pod fast. So technically this season has the same amount, if not more, as season 5. And to wrap up season 6, before we talk about season 7 and open up the call lines, and I'll just mention I started and pretty much finished, although who knows what'll happen, a series on the history of albums, starting with the pre 1950s into the 50s. What does an album mean? Why is it even called an album? And then albums by decade. And the decades of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, I had to break into 2 episodes each because they just ballooned. I haven't done the one in 2010s yet, although it will have aired by the time you see this or hear this. Who knows if that'll be 2 episodes as well. But I find going through history in that way super fascinating, and you discover things that are interesting, such as rock music has almost never been a dominant force on the charts. It has had its moments. It has had its hits. It has had its artists. But as dominant as it is in our cultural mindset and in the music world in general, it has very rarely been the top selling music. And that, coming from that type of background, in certain ways, that really surprised me. And there were other surprises through the series. And what's interesting is, yes, some of my opinions might be surprising, and that's fine. Anybody can do that. And I try not to be controversial for the sake of, whatever, which some people do. But what I find even more fascinating is discovering things that are already out there that are super surprising, like how the earliest video set to recorded music was in the 1890s or stuff like that, and so much more. The history of the cassette goes back to the 1930s, and all of these things. I think, yeah, or maybe 1920s. I don't know. But that's one of the things I find really exciting and really dug into in this season. I finished up mostly finished up my Beatles series. I think there are maybe 10 episodes of that. If you check the playlist on YouTube, I'll probably do more in the future, but the main series is done. And of course, went all the way. I did a couple of episodes on Give Me $50,000, which is my manifesto, basically having to do with income inequality and blah, 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 blah. And it's merch I have now that is also selling pretty well. So if you click the link, you'll find mugs and hats and tees and long sleeves of for Give Me $50,000. I wore that shirt traveling recently and got a ton of comments on it. It's so if you're the kind of person who likes to get attention, that's the one to get. But some other things are selling pretty well at the store too, like my red wreck bucket hat, which I'd like to get one of those for myself. Maybe not in red, but And so I feel like season 6 took it up a notch. Now, the big question was, am I going to do a season 7? Been raising money for it. Got some people on Patreon. Thank you again. Got some for donations for the actual fundraiser, and thank you, to Kelly and Kevin and Sandra and Chris and so many other people out there. I'm sorry I don't remember all the names, but and Cheryl and Lee and everybody who have contributed, and of course Julie and Nikki and Allegra and Steve and everyone who's been here, and all my friends at the Songwriters Club for Patreon and all of that stuff. And the announcement is I am doing a season 7. I won't necessarily be able to step it up the way I would like to, but it doesn't mean I won't at some point in that season. And the improvements I'd like to make are adding more to the videos, meaning flying in more graphics when needed, uh, subtitles, possibly a clip of a song here and there. I don't tend to do that because what I say to people is, if I'm talking about a song, you don't know what it is, I'd rather you go look for it. A, because it gives that song a play and that's good for the artist. But B, it's how curious are you curious enough to say, well, he was just talking about such and such. I'm going to go find it. Then again, I may put clips. I don't know. These are upgrades I'd like to make. I'd like to do 2 camera setup, which I think would be awesome. And it's not that I can't do that now, it's that I don't have the time. And time is money. So the better this is doing, and every season it's been doing better, the more I can add to it. So with your help out there, patreon.com/music is not a genre. It sounds like a PVS fund drive, and every podcast does it. I mean, other than Smartless, or the ones that are making a ton already. But there are podcasts I listen to that have thousands and tens of hundreds of thousands of followers who, need support. And so do I. That's my pitch. But yes, I'm doing a season 7, and I'm very excited about that. As this is the last episode of season 6, that means that it'll be I usually take a couple of weeks off before I kick off season 7, which will happen sometime in September. So please stay tuned for that. And with that, I'm going to unmute people, which I believe you have to do yourself. I think I clicked ask to unmute. Yeah. So hey, with me today is a frequent guest, Steve Erickson, and long time, also somewhat of a frequent guest, by way of Julie DiMatteo, which is Nikki DiMatteo. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
I
How are you doing? How have things been going?
So far so good.
That's good. That's good. I'm glad you all could join. Also, thank you to Allegra for joining. She had to leave early. She was my former boss, my first boss at the Bronx Zoo,
Oh, Sue, okay.
and is the person whose job I sort of took over when I became manager. It wasn't really her position, but created it out of the hole that she left when she retired back in 2008 and moved to Alaska and has been there ever since. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Julie and Nikki are my parents, and it's been great lately because there have been quite a handful of episode topics that they've suggested, such as the weird band names. I think for season 7, I'm probably going to do one on commercial music, as you mentioned too,
Oh,
which
that's
could be
great.
fun. Yeah.
You
So
have such a sincerity uh, about what you do and tremendous energy, a beautiful store of knowledge, and the ability to just keep things moving along. I would like to see more, like even if it's a cappella uh, versions of what you're talking about, the songs that you're, even if I don't know the song specifically, but hearing you sing it, uh, I know there are copyright things and stuff like that. I don't know how much you can sing without having to pay.
well, you can. I mean, covers are covered.
Oh, okay.
Ironically, and especially if they're live, you can do a whole lot that way. And I mean, if you're doing a sample of a song, you wouldn't do more than a line or two anyway,
That's
so it
what
wouldn't
yeah.
matter. But yeah, I've been when I did like the one with two hit wonders, and I would sing some of the songs. Apparently, people like that, which is cool. And I've done that for some other episodes too. I don't do it for every single song, partly because I don't necessarily remember everyone, but also because then that tends to get a little bit too much. But yeah, I like that. I like that idea of just throwing in some singing there. But also everybody out there, keep in mind some of my bonus extra videos for the episodes are me doing acoustic versions of these songs.
Oh yeah.
And that's kind of, bonus content. So if you go to patreon.com/music is not a genre, you're going to get some of that. One of the ones that tended to make a pretty big impact, which I eventually put on YouTube, was a cover of a Duran Duran song that I did. So it's just one example, of that kind of thing. But I appreciate you saying I'm sincere. It's like the famous quote: "If you can fake that, you got it made." I don't know if it's P.T. Barnum or somebody, but
I'm
yeah.
not sure.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, but and listen, this is generally me, but me in a bit of performance mode in the sense that yes, I do try to like to keep things moving along,
Oh yeah.
and I
Sure.
find that what's interesting is for editing, I don't need to edit these because I do, I don't leave enough of a gap to go through the 2 hours it takes to edit an episode, but I do need to edit the interviews because the
Uh,
last thing you want to do is rush somebody you're talking to. You want to give them the space to think and figure out what their next comment is going to be and blah blah blah. And I love that. So the video itself is always raw, uncut, because I don't like jump cuts in videos, and it would take again hours and hours. But the audio, where you don't have that visual to keep you interested, I cut out the you know spaces there. So, for
thanks.
example, and Steve, you're a perfect example. We just did. I can't tell you how excited I am, and it's already aired at this point. Not for you guys because the time is weird, but by the time this comes out, for the people out there, this will have already aired, and that is Backtalk 4 on Charlie XCX. Her history, her new album. We just recorded that yesterday, and it's one of my favorite conversations I've had on or off camera. And the great illustration there of keeping things moving is, and this is true for every interview and every talk, it's not just Steve. The video version is about an hour and 1 minute, an hour and 2 minutes. The
Um,
audio version is maybe 46 minutes. So there's a good 15 minutes of both of us repeating ourselves or pausing or waiting for something, whatever else it is, that gets cut out of the audio because that's
yeah,
how you do it.
that's great. That's got to take time too. Yeah.
What were you saying, Steve?
Whenever I've recorded a podcast, I'm very conscious that I keep saying, kind of like, and I try not to, but I can't really help it. You seem much better at avoiding that kind of thing because you do these once a week, and uh, but there is a tendency in natural speech to even if you have talking points in your head, you can fully articulate everything as though you were reading out a script.
It's no, and that's absolutely true. And when I do talk, I mean, when people talk at a bar or whatever it is, of course, that's totally fine. I think the difference is you leave again space for people to figure things out. So every now and then when I'm editing, I might leave in a or a like, because it's a little flavor in there, but I cut out the other ones. And what this other podcast I edit about education, I was not cutting most of the knows out. I would cut the ahs out and the ums out and stuff. But then it turns out the host didn't like hearing themselves say over and over. And that got my ear tuned to, oh, okay. So there's some things that are repeated, and I do it too, and I do it less, and I think I do it less enough that I don't necessarily need to edit out my own episodes. Although again, if I had more time and resources, I might even end up editing that out, but I don't find it quite as interesting in it. I think the people who are public speakers are able to do what people do with teleprompters or people do with other things where they're it's like sight reading music, which is you're always going a little ahead of where you are so that you don't have a pause waiting for you. You know what's coming next. It's fascinates me about freestyle, hip hop is people live rhyming brand new rhymes out of nowhere, but it's that instinct of being able to think ahead and to plan things ahead and know what's coming next and, set it up basically that way.
There's a video of Juice WRLD freestyling for a full hour.
Wow. There's a guy I got into recently who I was a fan of a decade or so ago from Philly named Chitty Bang. That's his artist name. Used to be a duo, now it's just him. And I love his sound and his approach and everything, especially earlier on. And apparently in the 2010s, he set the Guinness record for freestyling. And I want to say it was like 8 or 9 hours or something like that. And that he had to freestyle while he was going to the bathroom so that he wouldn't break the, yeah. So I don't know, just some interesting stuff. Yeah. Go ahead. What were you saying? I don't know. That is a great question. I would have to look that up. I haven't checked that yet. I don't think it was recorded, but it's easy enough to look up. Just, and I think the person who had the record prior to that was maybe only an hour or so or 2 hours less, which an hour itself is amazing. But then you get up to the stratosphere like that, you're like, my God, I don't even know what to say. It does make me wonder if he, repeated himself at any point or what have you. But when you listen to his lyrics, you find that he's so prolific and he's so able to pull from so various things and references and even styles of rhyming that you could see how it's possible that he might not run out of material. I don't know. So,
I know that it's a big issue on YouTube that if you play copyrighted music, record labels will take all the profits from your video. So a lot of channels that do music criticism, including Anthony Fantano, who's probably the biggest YouTube music critic, just never play music in their review videos. And there are other people like, I think Tom the Shadows, who make all their money from Patreon because they do play. Universal Music Group is particularly notorious for this, but all the major labels and a lot of indie labels, even if you play 5 seconds, will copyright claim the video and take all the money.
Wow, even 5 seconds. Jeez. I know there used to be a cutoff, and because you even hear like talk show hosts will joke about it, where they'll be like, "Oh, you got to stop singing that song because I'll have to pay royalties or whatever." So it's like maybe it's a 2 or 3 second cutoff at this point. Really? I don't know if that's true for YouTube though.
Well, it would be one thing if, say, you play 5 seconds and they get 10% of the profits from your video. Getting 100% of them is really unfair. And like in a written review, you can quote lyrics. You can embed a music clip.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and there's a different classification for cover tunes. You do still get a degree of royalties for them, of course, much less. And if you distribute it in a certain way, this distribution company will cover that license for you. So you don't have to buy a license, which is really nice. It's different if you're printing up physical, then you have to buy the license for that. But for just streaming, they're all covered. It's kind of like when you walk into a restaurant, there's a good chance if it's been around a while, they're paying a licensing fee for the music they're playing. And that's what YouTube does for covers, let's say. But yeah, if you're playing clips, and what's funny is early on, the first season, when I had no idea what the hell I was doing, and it wasn't even called Music Is Not a Genre yet. It was called like the Thursday Throwback Track or something because it was an offshoot of the blog I was doing. I did play music in the background, but differently. I would be doing the talking I'm doing, and then very low in the background on my Victrola, because I was talking about vinyl at the time, I would put the LP that I was talking about. And in order for me to, and I've distributed that after the fact. I was only video for a while, and then as season like 3 started, I converted all of those to audio as well, and that's when I started streaming and blah blah blah. I didn't take that out, and there's a chance I'm probably not making any money on any of those episodes, but it was Catherine herself who said maybe you shouldn't be playing music, in these.
Because
But then what's funny is I think later on, a couple of years later, it's like, well, maybe you want to play a clip of the song, and I'm like, yeah, well, you can do it both ways, but if you're saying Anthony Fantano, it doesn't play it, and I know he's huge, it makes sense to me. And I think it has more to do with, are you doing something interesting that's keeping people's attention, as opposed to a song that they could hear, if they just did 3 clicks in a different browser. Yeah.
you mean if I sang something a cappella right now,
Mm-hmm.
you would have to pay a royalty on it?
Yeah, it depends on how much of it you sang. And again, like a cover
I heard, I heard Steve mention like 5 seconds or something. Or
well, that's the recorded one.
Oh, the record. Okay.
Like if I was talking about, if we were talking about Charlie XCX and then played something from her new album, Brat, that I wouldn't be able to make money off of that episode. But if you sang a little bit of it, you can still make some money.
But what about the singing? Like, say I sang "A Song of Love is a sad song."
Yeah.
Hi, Lily. Hi, Lo. Is that too much? Now that would you have
No,
to?
I think that's fine. And the thing is, it's an algorithm that goes through a processor. There's a real good chance it's not going to recognize that song based on what you
Really?
just did, so it won't be flagged, and then you're covered. Yeah.
Oh,
Sometimes people try to get around this by playing the song at much lower volume than the rest of the video, or they'll speed it up or slow it down, so the algorithm won't. Like Universal Music Group has some program hooked up to YouTube with every song they own, that comes through the entirety of YouTube to see if any of their music is being used.
wow.
Ha! I love that. That
Great.
reminds me of and we're almost out of time here, but I think this is a kind of a funny story. A couple of years ago, I was signed to a small label to create ambient instrumental music, which that is like chill wave or lo-fi. And I thought, well, I'm just getting to know these people. It's all on spec, and you're only going to get paid if they stream. So why don't I repurpose some of my old music? I'll make instrumentals out of things, or take a song that has already that kind of chill ambient quality and remix it in a way that fits their format. And they loved it. And then they sent it to the record label that they were working with, and the songs got flagged. And they were like, "Are you using pre-existing material?" And I was like, "Yeah, but it's my material. Like, I'm just repurposing my own material." And they said, "You can't do that. You're going to get us into trouble." And so I sent them a few other songs, and it ended up I think they're still in business, but maybe not doing that well. But we kind of parted ways on that because it was a really weird way to handle it, and the guy was pretty snide, unfortunately. But I get that there's this sort of like algorithm or business thing where they're like, well, we ran it through something, and this is a pre-existing song, but there's got to be some logic to it where you're like, yes, but I created this song. Yeah.
What would they do if you had used samples from a site like Looperman or Freesound? And I know those are completely free. I know there are also sites where you can pay uh, like a monthly subscription fee to be able to sample the music there.
So there is that difference where there are licensable samples, and you're not allowed to use those in a lot of music unless you obscure them in a way that they can't recognize them. But the free samples you can use wherever you want.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. Well, we're coming to the end of this. Thank you guys for hanging out with me, and I'm glad I got to talk to you for real.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, no question.
And thank you to everybody out there for watching and listening. As always, I love that you hung out with me for this season 6. It was a pretty exciting season. A lot of changes and a lot of things are in the works for season 7. As always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. I will talk to you in a few weeks.